The dust from the stagecoach wheels hadn't even settled when Beatrice Reynolds heard her father's voice cut through the summer heat like a blade, telling her that in 3 days she would become Mrs. Cornelius Blackwell, a man of 62 years who owned half the silver mines in Marysvale, Utah. And she felt the entire world tilt sideways as her 20-year-old heart cracked clean down the middle. She stood frozen on the porch of their modest ranch house, her calico dress whipping around her legs in the hot August wind of 1878, watching her father's weathered face as he avoided her eyes and spoke instead to the wooden planks beneath his boots. Her mother had been dead 2 years now, taken by fever, and without her gentle presence to soften him, Jacob Reynolds had become hard as the red rock canyons that surrounded their little valley. The ranch was failing. The cattle had succumbed to disease that spring, and the debts had piled up like tumbleweeds against a fence line. Cornelius Blackwell had offered a solution, one that required Beatrice's hand in marriage and nothing more. "You cannot be serious," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Papa, please tell me this is some cruel joke." "It is done, Beatrice. The papers are signed. Blackwell paid off every debt we owe, and in return, you will become his wife on Saturday. He is a respected man, wealthy beyond measure. You will want for nothing. Except love, except choice, except my own life." The words came out sharper than she intended, but she could not stop them. Her father finally looked at her then, and she saw something crumble behind his eyes, some last vestige of the man who had once taught her to ride, who had braided her hair when she was small, who had laughed at her mother's table. "Love is a luxury we cannot afford," he said quietly. "You will learn to accept this, as women have done since the beginning of time. Now, go inside and begin preparing your things. Mrs. Blackwell will be sending her seamstress tomorrow to fit you for a proper dress." Beatrice turned and walked into the house, her legs moving automatically while her mind reeled with panic and disbelief. She climbed the narrow stairs to her small bedroom and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the faded quilt her mother had made, the one with the star pattern that had taken 2 winters to complete. Her hands were shaking. 3 days. 72 hours until she became the property of a man old enough to be her grandfather, a man she had seen only twice in town, both times from a distance, noting his stooped shoulders and liver-spotted hands, his thin white hair, and the way he wheezed when he walked. She could not do it. She would not do it. As the sun began its descent behind the Tushar Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Beatrice made a decision. She would run. She had a little money saved, coins she had earned selling her embroidery work to the ladies in town. It was not much, but it might buy her passage on a stagecoach heading anywhere but here. She would leave tonight, under cover of darkness, and by the time her father discovered her absence, she would be miles away. She waited until the house fell silent, until she heard her father's snoring rumble through the thin walls, and then she moved. She dressed in her most practical clothing, a simple brown skirt and white blouse, and packed a small bag with a change of clothes, her mother's silver locket, and the embroidered handkerchief that bore her initials. She counted her money in the moonlight, streaming through her window. $14.30. It would have to be enough. The stairs creaked under her feet, and she froze, holding her breath, but her father's snoring continued uninterrupted. She slipped out the back door and made her way to the barn, thinking she might take one of the horses, but guilt stopped her. Her father had so little left. She could not steal from him, even as she fled the fate he had chosen for her. So she walked. She walked down the dusty road that led away from the ranch, toward the main road that would take her to town, and from there, she did not know where. The August night was warm, the air thick with the scent of sagebrush and pine from the mountains. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to light her way, and she moved quickly, her bag bouncing against her hip with each step. She had been walking for perhaps an hour when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Her heart lurched into her throat, and she looked around frantically for a place to hide, but the landscape offered little cover, just scrub brush and the occasional juniper tree. The rider was approaching fast, and she knew she could not outrun a horse. She stopped and turned, squaring her shoulders, preparing to face whoever was coming. The horse slowed as it approached, and in the moonlight, she could make out the silhouette of a man, tall in the saddle, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He brought his horse to a stop a few feet away and regarded her silently for a moment. She could feel his eyes on her, assessing, and she lifted her chin defiantly. "Bit late for a lady to be walking alone," he said finally. His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as a man who had spent time in Texas or maybe further south, especially on a road where bandits have been known to operate. "I can take care of myself," Beatrice said, though her voice wavered slightly. "And my business is my own." The man dismounted, and as he stepped closer, the moonlight revealed his features. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, and dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His eyes were pale, gray, or maybe blue. It was hard to tell in the darkness, and they studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore dusty trail clothes, dark pants, and a vest over a work shirt, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. "I am not questioning your capability, miss, but I would be a poor excuse for a man if I rode past a young woman alone on a dark road without at least offering assistance." He tipped his hat slightly. "Name is Vincent Quinn. I work at the Whitmore Ranch, about 15 miles west of here. I'm heading back there now after delivering some horses to a buyer in Richfield." "I do not need assistance," Beatrice said, though even as she spoke, she realized how foolish she sounded. Where exactly was she planning to go? She had no destination, no plan beyond the desperate need to escape. Vincent Quinn studied her for a long moment, and then he said quietly, "You are running from something." It was not a question, and Beatrice felt her carefully constructed defenses crumble. To her horror, tears began to slide down her cheeks, and she wiped at them angrily with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry. I should not be crying in front of a stranger. Please, just continue on your way. I will be fine." But Vincent did not move. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen, offering it to her. "Here, you must be thirsty after walking so far." She hesitated, then took the canteen and drank gratefully. The water was cool and clean, and she had not realized how parched she was until the liquid touched her lips. She handed it back to him and took a shaky breath. "Thank you. Would you like to tell me what is you out here alone in the middle of the night?" His voice was gentle, and there was genuine concern in his eyes. Beatrice looked at him, this stranger who had appeared out of the darkness like something from a dream, and she found herself wanting to tell him everything. Perhaps it was the kindness in his voice, or perhaps it was simply that she was desperate and alone and terrified, but the words spilled out of her in a rush. "My father has sold me," she said bitterly. "He has promised me to an old man, a wealthy mine owner who paid off our debts in exchange for my hand. I am to be married on Saturday, and I will not go through with it. So I am running, though I have nowhere to go and hardly any money, and I know it is foolish, but I would rather die free than live as that man's wife." Vincent's expression darkened as she spoke, and when she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as though he were chewing on something bitter. Finally, he said, "What is the old man's name?" "Cornelius Blackwell. He owns the silver mines here in Marysvale." "I know of him," Vincent said, and there was an edge to his voice that had not been there before. "He has a reputation. His first wife died under suspicious circumstances, and there were rumors that he was not kind to her. His second wife left him and fled back east, though he tells people she died. A man like that should not be allowed within 100 miles of someone like you." Beatrice felt a chill run through her despite the warm night. "I did not know all that. My father only spoke of his wealth and respectability." Vincent seemed to be thinking, his eyes distant, and then he looked at her directly and said something that made her heart stutter in her chest. "I have an idea, though you may think me mad for suggesting it. If your father has promised you to Blackwell, breaking that promise could bring trouble on your family, on you. But if you were already married to someone else, the contract would be void. Blackwell could not claim you." Beatrice stared at him, not quite understanding. "But I'm not married to anyone else." "You could be." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and yet shimmering with possibility. "I would marry you instead." She took a step back, her mind reeling. "You do not even know me. Why would you do such a thing?" Vincent ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time he looked uncertain. "I will not claim to be a noble man, miss, but I know what it is like to be trapped by circumstances beyond your control." My own parents were killed by raiders when I was 16, and I spent years working off their debts before I could call my life my own. I will not stand by and watch another person be sold into misery when I have the power to prevent it. Besides, and here a hint of a smile touched his lips, I have been meaning to settle down, find a good woman to build a life with. Perhaps fate has brought us together this night." "This is insane," Beatrice whispered, but even as she said it, she was considering his offer. What other choice did she have? She could continue running, but where would she go? Her money would run out in days, and then what? She would be alone, vulnerable, with no protection and no prospects. Or she could return home and submit to her father's will, marry Cornelius Blackwell, and live out her days as the wife of a cruel old man. Or she could take a chance on this stranger, this cowboy who had appeared out of the darkness, offering her an escape. "I know it is sudden," Vincent said, "and I know you have no reason to trust me. But I give you my word as a man of honor that I will treat you with respect. We can make this a marriage of convenience if you wish, separate rooms, separate lives. Or we can try to build something real together. That choice would be yours. But at least you would be free of Blackwell, and you would have a home and protection." Beatrice looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive, but she found only sincerity and a quiet strength that called to something deep inside her. She thought of her mother, of what she would have wanted for her daughter, and she knew it was not a life of misery with a cruel old man. Her mother had loved her father once, before the hardness had set in, and she had spoken often of the importance of choosing one's own path when possible. "If I agree to this," Beatrice said slowly, "I need to know that you truly mean what you say, that you will not force yourself upon me or treat me as property." "You have my word," Vincent said solemnly. "I will not touch you unless you wish it, and I will do everything in my power to make sure you feel safe and cared for." She took a deep breath, and then, feeling as though she were stepping off a cliff into unknown waters, she nodded. "All right. I will marry you, Vincent Quinn." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger and surprisingly handsome. "We should get moving then. There is a circuit preacher in Beaver, about 30 miles south of here. If we ride through the night, we can be there by morning and have the ceremony performed before your father even knows you are gone. Once we are legally married, Blackwell will have no claim on you." Beatrice nodded, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Vincent mounted his horse and then reached down to help her up. She hesitated for only a second before taking his hand, feeling the strength in his grip as he pulled her up behind him. She settled herself on the horse's back, acutely aware of how close she was to him, her arms wrapping around his waist to keep her balance. "Hold on tight," he said, and then they were moving, the horse stretching into a ground-eating lope that carried them south through the night. They rode in silence for a long time, the rhythmic sound of the horse's hooves and the rush of wind, the only sounds in the darkness. Beatrice rested her cheek against Vincent's back, feeling the warmth of him through his shirt, and she wondered what on earth she had just agreed to. She was running away with a complete stranger, a man whose last name she had learned only minutes ago, and she was going to marry him. It was the most reckless, impulsive thing she had ever done, and yet she felt a strange sense of rightness about it, as though some invisible hand were guiding her toward this exact moment. As the hours passed and the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, Vincent slowed the horse to a walk to give it a rest. They were in unfamiliar territory now, the landscape more rugged, with steep hills and narrow canyons. In the distance, Beatrice could see the outline of mountains, their peaks touched with the first golden light of sunrise. "Are you doing all right back there?" Vincent asked, glancing over his shoulder at her. "I am tired," Beatrice admitted, "but otherwise fine. How much further?" "Another hour, maybe 2. We will be in Beaver by mid-morning if we keep this pace." She nodded and tightened her grip around his waist as the horse picked up speed again. The sun rose fully as they rode, bathing the landscape in warm light, and Beatrice watched the world awaken around them. Birds began to sing, and she saw a family of deer drinking from a stream in the distance. It was beautiful, this wild country, harsh and unforgiving, but also magnificent in its own way. They reached Beaver just as the town was coming to life, shopkeepers opening their doors and women sweeping their stoops. Vincent guided the horse to a small white church at the edge of town, its steeple pointing toward the cloudless blue sky. He dismounted and then helped Beatrice down, his hands steady on her waist as he lifted her to the ground. "Wait here," he said. "I will see if I can find the preacher." Beatrice stood by the horse, her legs unsteady after the long ride, and tried to smooth the wrinkles from her skirt. She must look a sight, dusty and disheveled from traveling all night, but there was nothing to be done about it now. Vincent returned a few minutes later with an elderly man in black clothing, his white hair neatly combed and his eyes kind behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "This is Reverend Thompson," Vincent said. "I've explained our situation, and he has agreed to perform the ceremony." The Reverend smiled at Beatrice. "I understand you young folks are in a bit of a hurry. Love cannot wait, I suppose. Do you have witnesses?" Vincent looked around and spotted a woman hanging laundry in a yard across the street. He jogged over and spoke to her briefly, and she nodded enthusiastically, calling to her husband who was working in a garden plot. The couple came over, introducing themselves as Mr. and Mrs. Dalton, and they seemed delighted to serve as witnesses for a wedding. The ceremony was brief and simple. They stood in the church, the morning light streaming through the windows, casting patterns on the wooden floor, and Reverend Thompson read from his Bible and asked them to repeat their vows. When it came time for Vincent to speak, his voice was clear and steady. "I, Vincent Alexander Quinn, take you, Beatrice Ann Reynolds, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." Then it was Beatrice's turn, and she was surprised to find that her voice did not shake as she repeated the words that bound her life to the strangers. When she finished, Vincent reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. It was too large for her finger, clearly meant for a man, but he slipped it on anyway, and she curled her fingers to keep it from falling off. "I bought this for myself a few years ago," he explained quietly, "but never wore it. It will do until I can get you a proper ring." Reverend Thompson pronounced them man and wife, and the Daltons clapped and cheered. Vincent leaned down and kissed Beatrice softly on the forehead, a chaste gesture that nevertheless made her blush. They signed the marriage certificate, the Reverend and the Daltons adding their signatures as witnesses, and then Vincent paid the Reverend and thanked the Daltons for their time. "Well, Mrs. Quinn," Vincent said as they walked back to his horse, "we should get you home and settled before your father comes looking for you." Mrs. Quinn. The name sounded strange to her ears, foreign, and yet somehow right. She was married now to this cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere and offered her salvation. She still could not quite believe it was real. They stopped at a small general store, and Vincent bought provisions for the journey, along with a proper skirt and blouse for Beatrice to change into, as her clothing was gray with dust. She changed in the back room of the store, marveling at the softness of the new fabric, and when she emerged, Vincent's eyes widened slightly. "You look lovely," he said, and she felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. The ride back to Marysvale took most of the day. Vincent explained that the Whitmore Ranch, where he worked and lived, was actually northwest of town, but they would need to stop by her father's place first to collect her belongings and inform him of the marriage. Beatrice's stomach twisted with anxiety at the thought of facing her father, of seeing his reaction when he learned what she had done. They arrived at the Reynolds Ranch as the sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the dusty yard. Beatrice saw her father standing on the porch, his face haggard with worry, and beside him stood Cornelius Blackwell himself, dressed in an expensive suit that did nothing to hide his frail, aged frame. Her father's expression shifted from relief to confusion to fury as he watched Beatrice dismount from behind a strange man. "Beatrice, where in God's name have you been? We have been searching for you all day." Jacob Reynolds stormed down the porch steps, but stopped short when Vincent moved to stand beside Beatrice, his presence a protective wall. "Papa, I need to tell you something," Beatrice began, her voice stronger than she felt. "I have gotten married. This is my husband, Vincent Quinn." The silence that followed was deafening. Her father's face turned a mottled purple, and Cornelius Blackwell let out a strangled sound that might have been a cough or an exclamation of disbelief. "You have what?" her father finally managed to choke out. "Married? To whom? I've never seen this man before in my life." "That is correct, sir," Vincent said calmly, pulling the marriage certificate from his vest pocket. "We met last night, And we were married this morning by Reverend Thompson in Beaver. Everything is legal and binding, as you can see from this document." Jacob Reynolds snatched the certificate from Vincent's hand, his eyes scanning it frantically, and then he crumpled it in his fist. "This is not possible. You cannot do this, Beatrice. I have an agreement with Mr. Blackwell. You are promised to him." "I am sorry, Papa, but a woman cannot be married to two men. My marriage to Vincent voids any agreement you made with Mr. Blackwell." Cornelius Blackwell stepped forward, his rheumy eyes fixed on Beatrice with a look that made her skin crawl. "You stupid, foolish girl," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves scraping across stone. "Do you have any idea what you have done? I paid good money for you, and I expect to receive what I purchased." "My daughter is not merchandise to be bought and sold," Vincent said, his voice low and dangerous. "She is a human being with her own will and her own rights. Your agreement with Mr. Reynolds is worthless now, and I suggest you accept that and move on." "And who are you to tell me anything, boy?" Blackwell snarled. "You are nobody, a common ranch hand who has stolen another man's property." Vincent's hand moved to rest on the butt of his revolver, and Beatrice saw the muscle in his jaw twitch. "Call her property again," he said quietly, "and we will have a problem that cannot be solved with words." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, and for a moment Beatrice thought there might be violence, but her father stepped between them, his face weary and defeated. "Enough. What is done is done. Blackwell, you will have to find yourself another bride. I am sorry for the inconvenience, and I will work to pay back what you gave me, though it may take years." "You will pay it back in full, with interest," Blackwell spat, "or I will see you ruined. Mark my words, Reynolds, you have made a powerful enemy today, and you, girl," he turned his venom on Beatrice, "I hope you realize what a mistake you have made. This cowboy will tire of you within a month, and then you will have nothing, no home, no family, no future. You could have lived in luxury as my wife, and instead you chose poverty and hardship. You deserve whatever suffering comes to you." He turned and stalked to his expensive carriage, his driver helping him inside, and moments later they were rumbling away down the road, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Beatrice felt her knees go weak with relief, and Vincent's hand came up to steady her, his touch gentle on her elbow. Her father would not look at her. He stood with his shoulders slumped, staring at the ground, and when he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with disappointment. "Go pack your things, Beatrice. You have made your choice, and you must live with it. I hope this man treats you better than I believe he will, but I fear you have traded one bad situation for another." "Papa, please," Beatrice said, tears pricking her eyes. "Try to understand. I could not marry Mr. Blackwell. I would have died inside. And you think you will be happy with a stranger, a man you have known for less than a day? You are naive, daughter, and I pray you do not pay too dearly for your impulsiveness." He turned and went back into the house, leaving Beatrice and Vincent standing in the yard. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. Vincent touched her shoulder gently. "Come, let us get your belongings, and then I will take you to your new home. Tomorrow we can come back and try to speak with your father again when emotions are not running so high." They went inside, and Beatrice quickly gathered her few possessions, packing them into a trunk that had been her mother's. Vincent carried it out to his horse, securing it with rope, and then they were ready to leave. Beatrice paused at the doorway of the house, looking back at the rooms where she had grown up, where her mother had laughed and cooked and sewn, where she'd been happy once, long ago. Then she squared her shoulders and walked out into the sunlight, closing the door behind her. The ride to the Whitmore Ranch took another 2 hours. The land changed as they traveled west, becoming more mountainous, with thick stands of pine and aspen trees covering the slopes. They followed a creek that ran clear and cold from the high country, and Beatrice saw trout flashing silver in the shallow pools. As the sun touched the horizon, they crested a rise, and Vincent pointed down into a broad valley. "There," he said, "that is the Whitmore place." Beatrice looked and saw a sprawling ranch spread out below them, with a large house, several barns, and numerous corrals filled with horses. Cattle dotted the fields, and she could see men working in the distance, their figures small and dark against the golden grass. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and the whole scene had an air of prosperity and permanence that made her feel a little more secure about her impulsive decision. They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the house, a man emerged from the barn, tall and gray-haired with a weathered face that broke into a broad smile when he saw Vincent. "Quinn, I was starting to wonder if you had gotten lost on the way back from Richfield. Did the buyer give you any trouble with those horses?" Vincent dismounted and helped Beatrice down, and she saw the older man's eyes widen with surprise when he noticed her. "No trouble at all, boss. But I do have some unexpected news. This is Beatrice Reynolds, or rather, Beatrice Quinn now, my wife. We were married this morning." The man's jaw dropped, and then he let out a loud laugh that echoed across the yard. "Your wife? Well, I will be damned. When you left here 3 days ago, you were a bachelor with no prospects, and now you return with a bride? You work fast, Quinn. I will give you that." He turned to Beatrice and swept off his hat in a courtly gesture. "Forgive my language. Madame, I am Robert Whitmore, and I am pleased to make your acquaintance, though I confess I am shocked by this development." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Whitmore," Beatrice said, managing a smile despite her exhaustion. "And I am sure the story of how we came to be married is as surprising to you as the fact itself." "I imagine it is quite a tale," Robert agreed. "But let us get you both inside and fed before we go into all that. My wife, Sarah, will be beside herself when she hears we have a new addition to the ranch. She has been after me for years to hire more women, saying the place is too full of rough men and needs a feminine touch." He led them into the house, calling for his wife. And moments later, a plump, kind-faced woman in her 50s appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes lit up when she saw Beatrice, and she immediately bustled over, taking both of Beatrice's hands in hers. "Oh, my stars, a young woman, and such a pretty one at that. You poor dear, you look absolutely exhausted. Robert, what are you thinking, keeping her standing here in the entryway? Bring her to the kitchen and let me fix her something to eat." She turned to Vincent and swatted him on the arm with her apron. "And you, Vincent Quinn, you have some explaining to do. Where did you find this lovely girl, and how did you convince her to marry a scoundrel like you?" Despite her tiredness and the emotional turmoil of the day, Beatrice found herself laughing. Sarah Whitmore reminded her of her mother with her warm manner and no-nonsense attitude, and she felt immediately at ease. They all moved into the large, cozy kitchen, and Sarah began pulling out food, setting before them fresh bread, cold roast beef, cheese, and apple pie that made Beatrice's mouth water. As they ate, Vincent told the Whitmores the entire story, from how he had encountered Beatrice on the road to their hasty marriage in Beaver to the confrontation with her father and Cornelius Blackwell. Robert's expression grew darker as he listened, particularly when Vincent mentioned Blackwell's name. "That man is poison," Robert said grimly. "I have dealt with him a few times over the years, and he is as corrupt and cruel as they come. You did the right thing, Quinn, marrying this young lady and getting her away from him. I would not have wished such a fate on my worst enemy, let alone a girl as young and innocent as Miss Beatrice here." "Mrs. Beatrice," Sarah corrected with a smile. "She is Mrs. Quinn now, and we must remember that. Oh, this is all so romantic, like something out of a dime novel, the brave cowboy rescuing the damsel in distress." Beatrice felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. "I do not know about all that. I feel I have caused nothing but trouble for everyone. My father is now in debt to a dangerous man, and Vincent has taken on a wife he did not plan for. I am grateful beyond measure for what he has done, but I cannot help feeling guilty." Vincent reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the gesture surprising her with its warmth and familiarity. "You have nothing to feel guilty about. Your father made a choice that was wrong, and you had every right to refuse it. As for me, I meant what I said earlier. I have no regrets about marrying you, Beatrice. None at all." Their eyes met, and Beatrice felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or anxiety. There was something in Vincent's gaze, a depth and sincerity that made her want to trust him completely, to believe that perhaps this impulsive marriage might turn into something real and lasting. Sarah noticed the exchange and smiled to herself as she stood to clear the dishes. "Well, we should get you two settled for the night. Vincent, you have been living in the bunkhouse with the other hands, but that will not do now that you are a married man. We have a small cabin on the east side of the property, just past the horse pasture. It has been empty since the Johnsons moved back to Missouri last year, but it is clean and sturdy. You and Beatrice can make your home there." "That's more than generous, Sarah," Vincent said. "We cannot thank you enough." "Nonsense. You are one of the best workers we have ever had, Vincent, and you have earned a place of your own. Tomorrow we can go over and make sure the cabin has everything you need, but for tonight I have already made up the bed with fresh linens. There is firewood stacked on the porch, and the pump works well, so you will have water." She handed Vincent a lantern, already lit, and Robert clapped him on the shoulder. "Congratulations, son. I hope you and your bride will be very happy together." They said their good nights, and Vincent led Beatrice back outside and across the darkened ranch yard. The cabin was a 10-minute walk from the main house, nestled in a grove of aspen trees that rustled softly in the evening breeze. It was small but well built, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Vincent unlocked the door and held the lantern high, illuminating the interior. It was a single large room with a sleeping area separated by a curtain on one end, a small kitchen with a cast-iron stove on the other, and a sitting area in the middle with a comfortable-looking sofa and 2 chairs. A table with 4 chairs sat beneath the window, and Beatrice could see that Sarah had indeed prepared the place for them, with wildflowers in a vase on the table and the faint scent of soap and beeswax in the air. "It is not much," Vincent said, setting the lantern on the table. "But it is home. Or it can be, if you are willing." Beatrice turned to look at him, this man who was now her husband, and she felt a rush of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Less than 24 hours ago she had been trapped, facing a future of misery and servitude, and now she stood in a cozy cabin with a man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who had married her to save her from a terrible fate, who looked at her as though she were precious and worth protecting. "Vincent," she said softly, "I want to thank you. Truly. I know you said you have no regrets, but you must know that you have taken on a great deal by marrying me. You are responsible for me now, and that is no small burden." He crossed the room to stand before her, and his hands came up to gently cup her face. "You are not a burden, Beatrice. You are my wife, and I will do everything in my power to make you happy. I know we do not know each other well yet, but I meant every word of those vows I spoke today. I am committed to this marriage, to you, for as long as you will have me." She reached up and covered his hands with hers, feeling the calluses on his palms, the strength in his fingers. "I want to try," she whispered. "I want to make this work. I want us to be a real husband and wife, not just 2 strangers bound by convenience." Vincent's eyes darkened with emotion, and he leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but she did not. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet, tentative at first and then deepening as she responded, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. It was her first real kiss, and it made her head spin and her heart race, and when they finally broke apart, she was breathless. "I have wanted to do that since I first saw you standing on that road in the moonlight," Vincent admitted, his voice rough. "You are so beautiful, Beatrice, inside and out." She smiled up at him, feeling shy and bold all at once. "I think I have been falling in love with you since you offered to marry me instead of letting me face Blackwell. Is that foolish?" "No more foolish than me falling in love with you in the same moment," he replied. And then he was kissing her again, and Beatrice felt as though she were melting, as though all the fear and uncertainty of the past days were burning away in the heat of his touch. They moved to the bed eventually, their kisses growing more urgent, and Vincent was true to his word about giving her control. He asked permission before every touch, every caress, making sure she was comfortable and willing, and Beatrice found herself wanting him with an intensity that surprised her. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, awkward in places as they learned each other's bodies, but ultimately wonderful in a way that left Beatrice feeling cherished and complete. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Vincent's arm around her shoulders and her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The lantern had burned low, casting flickering shadows on the log walls, and outside, the night was full of the sounds of crickets and a distant owl. "Vincent," Beatrice said quietly, "tell me about yourself. I realize I married you without knowing anything about your past." He was silent for a moment, his fingers absently stroking her hair, and then he began to speak. "I was born in Texas, in a small town called Fredericksburg. My parents were German immigrants who came to America hoping for a better life. They worked hard, saved every penny, and eventually bought a small farm. I had 2 sisters, both younger than me. Life was good for a while. We were not rich, but we were happy. He paused, and Beatrice felt him tense beneath her. When I was 16, raiders came. They were deserters from the Confederate Army, men who had turned to banditry to survive. They killed my parents and took what little we had. My sisters and I survived only because we were in town that day, visiting our aunt. "Oh, Vincent," Beatrice breathed, her heart aching for him. "I'm so sorry." My sisters went to live with relatives back in Germany. He continued. "But I stayed. I worked for years to pay off my parents' debts and to send money to my sisters. When I finally had enough saved, I headed west, looking for a fresh start. I worked on various ranches, learning everything I could about horses and cattle, and eventually I ended up here at the Whitmore place. Robert and Sarah have been good to me, like a second family. And now I have you." He tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "You are my fresh start, Beatrice, my chance at building something good and lasting." She kissed him softly. "We will build it together." The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Vincent worked long hours on the ranch, training horses and mending fences and doing the 100 other tasks that kept a large operation running smoothly. Beatrice threw herself into making their little cabin a home, sewing curtains and scrubbing floors, and learning to cook on the temperamental stove. Sarah Whitmore became a friend and mentor, teaching her the finer points of frontier cooking and sharing gossip and stories over cups of strong coffee. 3 weeks after their wedding, Beatrice and Vincent rode back to her father's ranch. She had written him a letter, delivered by one of the Whitmore ranch hands, explaining that she was happy and asking if they could visit. There had been no reply, but she needed to try to mend the rift between them. Her father was working in the barn when they arrived, and he looked up warily as they approached. Beatrice's heart clenched at how much older he looked, how the lines in his face had deepened with worry and exhaustion. "Papa," she said, dismounting and walking toward him. "Thank you for letting us come." Jacob Reynolds set down the harness he had been repairing and studied her for a long moment. "You look well," he said finally, and there was surprise in his voice. "I expected you to look miserable, to be regretting your decision, but you seem happy." "I am happy, Papa. Vincent is a good man. He treats me with kindness and respect, and we are building a life together. Please, can you not be happy for me?" Her father's expression softened slightly, and he sighed. "I suppose I have been unfair. I was so focused on saving the ranch, on keeping us afloat, that I did not stop to consider your feelings. Your mother would have been ashamed of me for trying to force you into that marriage." He looked at Vincent. "You take care of my daughter, you hear? If I find out you have mistreated her, I will come after you with my shotgun. Debts be damned." Vincent nodded solemnly. "You have my word." "Sir, I love Beatrice, and I will spend my life making sure she is safe and happy." "Love?" Jacob's eyebrows rose. "You love her already. You have known her less than a month." "Sometimes a month is all you need to recognize what your heart has been searching for," Vincent replied, and he reached out to take Beatrice's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Her father studied them for a moment longer, and then a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Well, perhaps things have worked out for the best after all. I am still in debt to Blackwell, but I will find a way to manage it. Come inside. I have stew on the stove, and we can talk like civilized people." They spent the afternoon at the ranch, and by the time they left, Beatrice felt as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her father had given his blessing, however reluctantly, and he had even shaken Vincent's hand and invited them to return for Sunday dinner the following week. As they rode back to the Whitmore ranch, the sun setting behind the mountains in a blaze of orange and gold, Beatrice leaned back against Vincent and sighed contentedly. "I think everything is going to be all right," she said. "I think we are going to be all right." Vincent's arm tightened around her waist. "More than all right," he said. "We are going to be wonderful." The months passed, summer giving way to autumn and then to winter. The Tusher Mountains were capped with snow, and the valley filled with a crisp cold that made every breath visible. Beatrice and Vincent settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They learned each other's habits and quirks, laughed together and argued occasionally, and grew closer with each passing day. In December, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She'd been feeling tired and queasy for weeks, and Sarah Whitmore had taken one look at her and guessed the truth before Beatrice herself had fully accepted it. When she told Vincent, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, and then carefully set her down and kissed her as though she were made of spun glass. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "A family, our own family." Their son was born the following August, a healthy, squalling infant with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They named him William Jacob Quinn, after Vincent's father and Beatrice's, and from the moment Beatrice held him in her arms, she knew that every decision she had made, every risk she had taken, had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment. Her father visited frequently, his relationship with them warming considerably after William's birth. He doted on his grandson, and Beatrice could see the pain of losing her mother easing slightly as he found joy in the new generation. Even the debt to Cornelius Blackwell had been resolved, Robert Whitmore having stepped in to pay off the remaining balance in exchange for Jacob, working as a consultant for the ranch, sharing his knowledge of cattle breeding and range management. When William was 2 years old, they learned that Beatrice was expecting again. This time, she gave birth to twin girls in the spring of 1883, red-faced and fierce, and they named them Sarah and Annabelle, the first after Sarah Whitmore, who had become like a mother to Beatrice, and the second after Vincent's mother. Vincent was beside himself with pride and joy, and he proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful with his children. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and triumphs. Vincent was promoted to foreman of the Whitmore Ranch, a position that came with increased responsibility and a substantial raise in pay. They added on to their little cabin, building 2 additional bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Beatrice started a small business selling her embroidery work, her designs becoming popular among the ladies of Marysvale and the surrounding towns. In 1885, they heard that Cornelius Blackwell had died, choking on a piece of steak at a dinner party in Salt Lake City. Beatrice felt nothing but relief at the news, grateful once again that Vincent had saved her from such a fate. She could not imagine her life having turned out any other way than it had, could not picture herself with anyone other than the tall, gray-eyed cowboy who had appeared out of the darkness on that August night so many years ago. They had 2 more children over the years, another son they named Robert, and a daughter named Margaret. Their home was always full of noise and laughter, of children running through the fields and playing in the creek, of family dinners around their expanded table. Vincent taught William and Robert to ride and rope, while Beatrice taught the girls to sew and cook and manage a household. Jacob Reynolds passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1890, content in the knowledge that his daughter was happy and thriving. Beatrice mourned him deeply, but also felt grateful that they had reconciled in his final years, that he had been able to see the life she had built and be proud of her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Beatrice with a proper wedding ring, a delicate band of gold with a small diamond that sparkled in the sunlight. He slipped it onto her finger, replacing the masculine ring he had given her on their wedding day, and he kissed her hand with all the tenderness and devotion of a man still deeply in love. 10 years, he said softly, and I would marry you all over again in a heartbeat. You have made me the happiest man alive, Beatrice Quinn. She smiled at him, seeing the traces of silver in his dark hair now, the fine lines around his eyes that came from years of squinting into the sun, and she thought he had never looked more handsome. And you have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. I love you, Vincent, more today than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow. They had been given a rare evening alone, Sarah and Robert watching the children at the main house so that Beatrice and Vincent could have a quiet dinner together. They sat on their porch as the sun set, watching the play of light across the mountains, holding hands and remembering that night 10 years ago when their lives had collided on a dusty road. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not been riding that road that night?" Vincent asked. "If I had taken a different route, or left a day earlier or later?" "I try not to think about it," Beatrice admitted, "because I do not like to imagine a life without you in it. I think perhaps it was meant to be, that some force larger than ourselves brought us together at exactly the right moment. Fate, Vincent mused. I like that idea. That you were always meant to be mine, and I was always meant to be yours. We were meant to save each other, Beatrice said. You saved me from Blackwell, and I saved you from a life alone. Together, we are stronger than we ever could have been apart. He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The sounds of the ranch surrounded them, the lowing of cattle and the whinny of horses, the distant laughter of the ranch hands heading to the bunkhouse, the hoot of an owl in the trees. It was the sound of home, of family, of a life well lived. As the years continued to pass, their family grew in other ways. William grew into a tall, strong young man who shared his father's love of horses and his mother's kind heart. He met a girl named Emma at a church social when he was 20, and they were married within the year, building their own small cabin on the Whitmore Ranch with Vincent's help. The twin girls, Sarah and Annabelle, grew into beautiful young women, both of them inheriting their mother's talent for needlework and their father's gray eyes. Sarah married a schoolteacher from Beaver, while Annabelle fell in love with a rancher's son from the neighboring property. Robert and Margaret, the two youngest, were inseparable growing up, a dynamic duo who got into all sorts of mischief and kept their parents on their toes. Robert had his father's reckless bravery and his mother's stubborn determination, while Margaret was quiet and thoughtful, always with her nose in a book. Vincent and Beatrice became grandparents for the first time in 1898, when William and Emma welcomed a daughter they named Beatrice Rose. Holding her tiny granddaughter, looking down into her perfect little face, Beatrice felt her heart overflow with gratitude for the life she had been given. She thought of her mother, wished she could have been there to see this, to know that her daughter had found love and happiness and built a family of her own. On summer evenings, when all the children and grandchildren gathered at their home for dinner, the table overflowing with food and laughter, Vincent would sometimes catch Beatrice's eye across the crowded room and wink at her. In those moments, she would remember that night on the road, when a stranger had appeared out of the darkness and changed her life forever, and she would send up a silent prayer of thanks to whatever force had brought them together. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their movements slower, but their love as strong as ever. Vincent still worked on the ranch, though he had turned over most of the heavy labor to younger men, and Beatrice still tended her garden and her embroidery work, though her eyesight was not what it once was. They took long walks together in the evenings, hand in hand, talking about their children and grandchildren and the life they had built. On a warm evening in June of 1915, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Vincent turned to Beatrice and said, "I want you to know something. These years with you have been the greatest blessing of my life. Every single day I have thanked God for bringing you into my world. I could not have asked for a better partner, a better wife, a better mother for my children. You are everything to me, Beatrice, everything." Tears filled her eyes as she looked at him, at this man who had given her so much, who had loved her so completely. "And you are my heart," she said softly, "my home, my forever. I love you, Vincent Quinn, now and always." He leaned over and kissed her, a gentle press of lips that held 37 years of love and commitment and devotion, and Beatrice felt as though her heart might burst with the fullness of it all. They had been through so much together, weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, raised 5 children and welcomed numerous grandchildren, built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. As the sun finally dipped below the mountains and the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for every moment they had been given together. The wild land around them was no longer quite so wild, civilization creeping in with railroads and telegraph lines and motor cars. But their love remained as fierce and true as it had been on that August night in 1878, when a young woman fleeing a terrible fate had met a cowboy on a lonely road and 2 lives had become one. Their story became part of the family lore, told and retold to children and grandchildren over the years. The tale of how Grandpa Vincent had rescued Grandma Beatrice, how they had gotten married within hours of meeting, how their impulsive decision had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime. It was a story of courage and faith, of taking chances and trusting in the goodness of others, of two souls finding each other against all odds. Vincent passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1918, with Beatrice holding his hand and all their children gathered around his bed. He was 75 years old, and he died the way he had lived, surrounded by love and family. Beatrice mourned him deeply, feeling as though a part of her soul had been torn away, but she also felt grateful for the 40 years they had been given together, for the beautiful family they had created, for a love that had defied convention and expectation. She lived another 5 years, spending her days with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, sharing stories of their grandfather and keeping his memory alive. She never remarried, never even considered it, for there had only ever been one man for her, one great love that had defined her entire life. When Beatrice passed away in her sleep in 1923, her children found a letter tucked into her Bible, written in her careful hand. It was addressed to Vincent, though he had been gone for 5 years, and in it, she poured out her heart one final time. My dearest Vincent, if you are reading this, then I have finally joined you in whatever comes after this life. I pray that heaven is a place where we can be together again, where I can feel your arms around me and hear your voice calling me beautiful. You gave me everything, my love. You gave me freedom when I had none, love when I was desperate, a family when I was alone, and a lifetime of happiness beyond measure. I have no regrets, no sorrows, except that our time together was not longer. But what time we had, oh, it was glorious. Wait for me, my darling. I am coming home to you. Your Beatrice, now and forever. They were buried side by side in a small cemetery overlooking the valley they had called home for so many years, their shared headstone bearing a simple inscription: Vincent and Beatrice Quinn, two souls, one heart, together in life, together in eternity. Their descendants continued to thrive in Marysvale and the surrounding areas, carrying forward the legacy of courage and love that their ancestors had established. The little cabin where they had started their married life was preserved and maintained, eventually becoming a cherished family gathering place where new generations came to hear the story of how it all began. And on warm August nights, when the moon was full and the wind whispered through the aspen trees, some said you could still feel their presence there. Two spirits forever intertwined, eternally grateful for that chance meeting on a dusty road so many years ago, when a desperate young woman and a cowboy with a kind heart had found in each other everything they had been searching for, and had built from that impulsive moment a love story for the ages.